folks, it's a little after 6:30. So, hey, take note of that finely crafted display of the flag back there. Many years ago, the craftsman made that representing our group, the Calhoun County Gunners Association. We kind of struggled with a good display for the flag to do our pledge. Well, Jack is here tonight. He did that for us many years ago, and we've used it ever since. So, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. I got just a few announcements. Our guest speaker tonight is Tom Lambert. He's the president. You call yourself president? Whatever. He's the leader of a group called Michigan Open Carry. And they've been right at the front lines of the debate and battle to get this package of bills passed in our state legislature that would, it's nicknamed constitutional carry. It would make it so that if you're a law-abiding citizen and not prohibited from owning a firearm, that it wouldn't be necessary for you to acquire a license to carry concealed in the state of Michigan. And I think that's the way it ought to be out of principle. I'm going to continue to acquire a concealed pistol license because if I want to go to another state, then we've got reciprocal agreements with most of the other states, and so it's pretty handy and a valuable thing. But just out of principle, one of our earlier meetings, Dr. Bison was here, and we were having a discussion about it before the meeting, him and Sheriff Saxton and I were, and Dr. Bison asked, well, why do you think that it's necessary for this to happen? And I told him, well, I remember back when a license was not made available to me, not one that was worth having, back before 2001, and we had our shall issue package of bills passed, but there were times that I felt the need to have a self-defense tool with me. And fortunately, I never had to use it, and fortunately, I never got caught transporting it loaded in my vehicle or having it on my person loaded without a license to carry it concealed, because I would have been a felon, a criminal. And I think that got Dr. Bison thinking, and I'd like to think that had an influence on him, and he's one of our state representatives that voted in favor of passing the package of bills out of the state house. So that's a good deal. I'm going to let Tom give you the update on the rest of where the legislation goes. But one other thing, we've been kind of keeping track of Calhoun County for CPLs issued, and for the month of May, there were 165 total, and 50 of those were issued to gals. And we've asked the gal at the state police to break it down one more way.
Clerk's office,
Well,
Ames office.
she gets it from the state police too. Anyway, For the month of June, there were a total of 184. 53 of those were for women. 120 of them were renewals, and the new applications were 64. So we're going to keep track of the renewals and new applications now, which it's kind of interesting to keep track of that, and it's it's encouraging to me and amazing that there's still a lot of demand. There's a lot of people applying, new ones for CPL still. So that's a good thing. Can you think of any other announcement I ought to have? Okay, well, again, I'm just going to introduce Tom again and have him bring you up to date on where the legislation is at and how the struggle's continuing. Tom Lambert.
Thank you, Wayne. Again, my name is Tom Lambert. I'm the President and Legislative Director for Michigan Open Carry. Before I talk about the constitutional carry bills, if I may, just a little bit about open carry and Michigan Open Carry, what we do. Obviously, we're about open carry. And if you don't know what open carry is, I'm demonstrating here for you tonight. It's effectively not concealed carry. I can spend many, many hours talking about what open carry is, why open carry, but I don't want to get into that necessarily here tonight. But I do want to tell you what I see in open carry and what I see in Michigan Open Carry and why I'm a part of this organization and what I want to get out of this organization. And that is, I want to see the entire gun community grow. I don't want to just see people open carry more. I want more open carry. I want more concealed carry. I want more hunting. I want more collecting. I want more target shooting. I want more sport competition. I want more youth shooting. I want more education. I want more training. I want more of all of it. And I think the way we do that, or at least one of the ways we do that, one of our many tools in our toolbox is open carry. Effectively what it does is it brings gun ownership out of the closet. Everyone here knows that we are some of the most law-abiding members of society. Statistically, as CPL holders, pretty much no matter how you cut it, we're one of the most law-abiding segments in the entire United States. More law-abiding than our members of law enforcement, more law-abiding than our members of the legislature, and even more law-abiding than members of our judiciary. But people really don't know that because, well, out of sight, out of mind. And while out of sight sometimes has benefits, in the larger picture, in the larger political scale, when we're trying to show people that, look, we really are good people, out of sight isn't always the best thing. And I'm not here to tell you that open carry is wholly superior to concealed carry, because truthfully, I don't think either is superior. I think there are benefits to open carry. I think there are drawbacks to open carry. I think there are benefits to concealed carry. I think there are drawbacks to concealed carry. In my opinion, the decision on how one carries is up to that person in their specific situation. It's up to them. It's not up to me, and it's most certainly not up to the government. And that's why, again, I like to use open carry and Michigan Open Carry to further everything, to push everything. And so that might help you understand a little bit better why myself and Michigan Open Carry is at the front of pushing legislation that benefits concealed carry. Because as an organization, again, we support everything. And this legislation, I think, is the biggest piece of legislation that we have in front of us right now. There's a lot of stuff moving. There's even more stuff you're going to see, especially in the fall. But this is, I think, the biggest piece of legislation. As Wayne correctly pointed out, I want to make sure everybody understands the backdrop of what our environment is. The backdrop is a felony. If you don't do everything right, and you don't have a license, and you don't properly transport, if you mess up even slightly, especially in some of the counties on the east side of the state, you will absolutely be charged with a 5-year felony, and most likely be convicted too. And as I'm sure you already know, felonies ruin lives. And it doesn't matter if you had bad intent or not. There are good people every day that get charged in this state with a felony. I've gotten lots and lots of calls. Everyone just kind of picks at you and tears at you a little bit because you get someone on the phone that, well, you know what, I'm just trying to protect myself and I really didn't do anything wrong. I didn't have any bad intent or I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. I had my gun unloaded. In fact, it was in the back seat. I didn't have any ammunition in the car, but because it wasn't in a case designed for the storage of firearms, now I'm being faced with a felony. Yeah, I understand that, and the truth is you're probably going to lose too. And as much as I don't want to tell you that, I don't want to lie to you at the same time. It happens, and it happens a lot. And I don't think it's right. And so what this legislation does is it first and foremost puts an end to that. But it does a whole lot more. Before I get into the details, I want to make two things very, very clear. This legislation does not change the purchasing process for a pistol. For 90 years in Michigan, we have had the equivalent of universal background checks when it comes to purchasing a pistol. Now, I'm not going to go into whether or not background checks are good or bad. We'll just leave that off to the side for right now, because again, we don't even touch that with this legislation. The process that it is today to purchase a pistol will be the process after this legislation, or should this legislation pass and be signed. No matter what, you have to get a background check of some sort before purchasing a pistol in this state. Either you get it at the dealer, you get it at the police station, or you get your background check when you get your CPL. So that process does not change in this legislation. The next thing is this legislation does not change any of the restricted zones for carrying a firearm. I would love to see those zones change, but that's just like before. That's another conversation that is set off to the side, and we'll deal with that conversation later. In my opinion, well, there are multiple packages of legislation that have been introduced dealing with this one subject. In my opinion, the reason why this one package that we're talking about tonight has actually started to move is because of how narrowly focused it actually is. It doesn't deal with anything else. All it deals with is, and here it is, whether or not you need to have a license to carry a concealed pistol. That's all it changes, whether or not you need to have a license to carry a concealed pistol or a pistol in your vehicle. So what it would do is anywhere you can currently openly carry a pistol without a license, because what I'm doing right now technically does not require a license. Only when I get in my car or only when I put my shirt over it do I actually have to have a license. And there are people every single day that carry in this state without a license. They do so lawfully, and they do so safely, and they do so respectfully. I'm not aware of any crime wave of people carrying openly without a license. So we've already proven people can, in this state, carry just fine without a license. And so what it would allow them to do is effectively put a shirt over it or put a coat over it. Something I think is very relevant in a northern state like Michigan. Another thing it allows them to do is if you caught it allows them to get into their vehicle. A number of years ago, I want to say it was probably about 6 years ago now, I don't remember which county it was. It was Calhoun, Kalamazoo, somewhere in here. A member of my organization had his application into the county gun board to get his CPL. And that was back when it took a really long time for you to actually get your license, for them to respond to you. Well, he had gone to a restaurant. He came out of the restaurant, and the parking lot was very busy. And in order for him to lawfully transport his pistol at that time, without having a CPL, he had to unload it, put it in a case, and put it in his trunk. If you're not sure what that looks like, he was carrying, much like I am right now, so he had to grab his firearm, pull it out of his holster, take the magazine out, take that round out of the chamber, put it in the case, and put it in the trunk. Well, if you don't know what you're looking at, that might cause you to maybe not feel so comfortable. Well, not wanting to make anyone feel uncomfortable, what he did is he opened his car door. He sat down in his car with his feet outside to take care of business, so he wouldn't alarm anyone. Well, an officer saw that, an officer that didn't really like open carry and knew what that guy just did. Went up and investigated, found out he didn't have a CPL yet, charged him with a felony. All because he was trying to do the right thing. So, again, we can already open carry without a license, just walking down the sidewalk in public. We can already do this. All this legislation does is allow you to put a coat on or put a shirt over your firearm or get in your vehicle without that really strict and severe punishment of a felony. Doesn't change the purchasing process, doesn't change where you can go, all that'll be handled later. Something else. That debate's for another time. But let's talk about a few concerns. Because honestly, I have concerns with this legislation. First is, raise your hand if you think training is a bad thing. So we're clear, nobody's raising their hand, right? Everybody thinks training is a good thing. I think training is a good thing too. I'm a certified instructor. But now, the question is not whether or not training is a good thing, whether or not it should be required in order to exercise a right. And that is a very important distinction. And personally, I say no, it's not. It should not be required in order to exercise a right. Okay, so now we've got the moral stance out of the way. Should. But, well, as a member of, as a leader in the gun community, that voice is still in the back of my head that says, well, Tom, yeah, we can, rights are great, and we can respect rights, and that's very important to do, but, well, what happens when crime goes up and accidents go up and people actually get hurt? Isn't that going to not only hurt them, isn't that going to hurt the entire community? I think, well, gee, yeah, that really would hurt the community. But what makes me, personally, feel better about this is I look to other states that have already passed this legislation. There are 12 other states that already have what we're trying to do in the law. 12 other states. 13 depending on how you count. There are 22 other states that have legislation pending to do what we're doing. So we won't be the first by a long shot. For what it's worth, the state of New Hampshire, where's it, Vermont? The state of Vermont, that's right, Bernie Sanders' land, for what it's worth, has never required a concealed pistol license. They have some of the lowest crime rates in the country. We looked at other states that have done this more recently. West Virginia. Just a couple weeks ago was the 1-year anniversary for Idaho. And what did they report there? They report actually crimes continuing to go down just like it was before. In fact, the people that are getting licensed is still continuing to go up. Trainers are not reporting empty classes. In fact, they're reporting increased roles in their classes. Let that sink in. Making the training optional actually drove more people to get training. That's a story in and of itself there. And there's a lot that goes into it. But not every single state, but most of the states that have passed this sort of legislation have seen this result. They've seen more people still getting licensed, more people still getting trained, crime rates continuing to fall. And so then that voice in the back of my head goes, well, gee, you know what? That did sound reasonable to have that fear at first, but if I'm looking at all these other states that have produced a result and not a single one of them have my fears come true in, I think we can do that here in Michigan. And I think it's reasonable to expect that same result here in Michigan. So when Wayne talks about these numbers for concealed pistol holders going up, I think that's fantastic. And I think if we pass this legislation, those numbers will continue that trend to go up. And I certainly hope, even after this legislation, those numbers will continue to go up. And here's why I'm confident the numbers will go up. So let's go back a little bit to what this legislation does. As I mentioned, it doesn't change any of the restricted zones. If you don't have a CPL, there's a list of places, and I have a trifold here if you'd like to know what these places are, where you cannot possess a firearm. Okay, anybody take some and pass them around here. Start some over there and some over here too. Just grab one so I know what I'm telling you. And if you open it up, just right to the middle sheet, right in the inside here, there's a list of places. The statute is 750.234D, it's in the penal code. If you do not have a license to carry a concealed pistol, or you do not have permission from the establishment, you cannot possess a firearm on the premises of any of the places listed in here. Well, one of them is an establishment licensed under the Michigan Liquor Control Act. Well, think of Meijer. Meijer has a liquor license. Think of many of your gas stations. They have liquor licenses. They don't actually have to sell, they just have to be licensed. Churches, theaters, courts, banks, you cannot possess a firearm, not just a pistol, any firearm, in any manner, even in your car, on these premises without permission or a concealed pistol license. So even if this legislation passes, that doesn't change. People will still need a CPL to be able to carry in those places. They'll still need a CPL if they want to purchase pistols privately without going to the police station. And they will still need a CPL to carry in other states that require licensing. So that is why I think, so a CPL effectively will still be needed in Michigan for many reasons. I think most people will still continue to renew theirs, most people will still continue to get theirs, but, remember what I started off with? That felony won't be hanging over anyone's head anymore, because we'll finally start respecting people's rights and respecting the Constitution as their permit to carry. So we talk about training. Yeah, training's a great thing, and I do think people will continue to get trained, and I do think the amount of people continue to get trained will continue to increase. The next thing is who can have a gun. Some people have tried to say, well, you can't get a CPL, and some people will be able to conceal a pistol without getting a CPL, even though they couldn't get a CPL before. That's technically true, because there is a very long list of misdemeanor disqualifiers that disqualify you from being able to get a CPL. And for what it's worth, that list does not apply to our members of law enforcement. And there are a number of items in this list that are just downright silly.
It's a big list.
It's a very long list, and other states don't have a list like this. Well, even if you're in that list and you've done something that, yeah, you know what, you messed up, you probably shouldn't have a gun. Well, technically, even though you might not be able to get a CPL, you could carry concealed under this new legislation, except for the fact that if you really do something stupid, you're going to be prohibited from having firearms completely. So forget open carry, forget concealed carry, forget keeping your rifle at home. If you do something wrong that really means you shouldn't have a firearm, you're not going to be able to have firearms at all. So while people talk about this, they ignore the fact that what we're doing is they're talking about what people can do when they get into a building, when in fact the people they're talking about can't even get into the building in the first place. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. That's the gist of what's going on with this legislation. And if you take anything home, a felony, I cannot stress that enough. This gets rid of a very strict, very punishing felony. It doesn't change the purchase process. It doesn't change who can have a gun. When somebody says in the news, well, this is more people can have a gun, I'm sorry, it doesn't affect that. And it doesn't affect any of the restricted zones. All it is common sense that allows you to do something that you should already be able to do in the first place. So put a coat on or get in your vehicle without getting a felony. Are there any questions about what this legislation does? And even about open carry or mission open carry? I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
It's not exactly a question, but the market, free markets, help people, generally speaking. And as long as the license training is required, you don't have much of a choice of where you're going to go. It's all going to cost a lot. If it's something you don't have to do, then those who are training might want to tempt you to come and do it for maybe slightly lower price. So there would be more of it done because of that too.
I completely agree with you. If you couldn't hear.
You want to repeat the question?
Sure.
I couldn't hear.
Yep, it's more of a comment, but I'm going to kind of rephrase. Basically, it's letting the free market work, right? Letting the free market work, that's why some of the training continues to increase. If the government comes in and mandates, well, here's the training you have to get a CPL, people go, I'm going to do that and call it good. But what if we allow the free market to decide? What if we say, well, look, especially somebody on the other side of the state, or not even on the other side of the state, anywhere in the state. I forgot, someone did the math, and at minimum wage, it was over a week's worth of wages to pay for the license alone. The license is currently $115. Then you have to do training on top of that. Well, what if you can't afford the 8 hours worth of training on a Saturday when you work every single Saturday because you're not earning a lot and you have a family to pay for? But what if you can afford 3 or 4 hours on a Wednesday night? And what if now these shops can start to tailor a little bit better to what people really need? I want to underscore that, what people really need rather than what the state dictates. As a CPL instructor myself, I can tell you in that 8-hour class that we teach, my classes are never 8 hours, they're usually closer to 10. There's a lot of information in there that, yeah, it's good information, but it's not information that I would be giving people right away. I would rather stick in some of the more important information I think the students really need to know as they're getting their feet wet, as they're starting out, and then say, hey, come back later, or here's where you can go find all this extra information. As you're, who here has a CPL for this one? Great. Did you learn everything you needed to know in that class? No, there's a lot of extra stuff you need to know, right? And so that's what
Again, I don't remember it.
well, you get that as well. Does everybody remember every single thing said in their class? Of course not. It's a process. It's a depreciable skill. Let's let the free market decide. Let's let the free market be more dynamic and allow to give people what they really want and what they really need, not what the state says they need. It's an excellent point.
In your estimation, what's the likelihood of passage?
Likelihood of passage. Thank you for that question. I completely forgot the part of where is this legislation at? And what is the legislation? The bill numbers, if you want to write this down, if you're interested, the bill numbers are 4416 through 4419. It's a 4-bill package, 4416 through 4419. The bill sponsors are Representative Hoytinga, Representative Aller, Representative Hornberger, and Representative Cole. 3 women and 1 man for the work on the bill sponsors. The legislation has already made it through the House. It came up in the House Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Representative Jim Runstead. Jim Runstead, the chair of the Judiciary Committee in the House, is very friendly to the gun community. Very friendly to the gun community. He's from the White Lake area on the other side of the state. For what it's worth, he's running for Senate. Personally speaking, just me as Tom, that's all. I think he would be great in the Michigan Senate, but that's just me speaking. We had 2 weeks worth of hearings, and they called special hearings for this particular legislation. They had their normal hearing in the morning, and then they came back at about 4 o'clock for 2 weeks in a row and had over 2 hours worth of testimony on this legislation 2 weeks in a row. That's a lot for legislation. The third week when they came back, they passed it out of committee on a party line vote. And then a couple weeks later, it came up in the House. The House had a bunch of debate on it, and they passed it. I forget the vote. It was it passed by about 7 or 8 votes out of the House, and it is now goes over to the Senate, where it effectively starts that process again. Senate Majority Leader Arlen Meekoff, the Majority Leader decides effectively where or what committee the legislation goes to. He has decided it will go to his committee, which is the Government Operations Committee. If you don't know much about this committee, which honestly I didn't before this happened, The majority leader chairs this committee, so it's his committee. So he's effectively taken hold of this legislation, and it's his now. I don't know what that means. It either means something really good, or it either means something really bad. We don't know. It's kind of one extreme or the other. Either he personally wants to make sure this doesn't go anywhere, or he personally wants to make sure this does go somewhere. Otherwise, he would let it go to the Judiciary Committee that it normally goes to. And we don't know. We're optimistic that we can work with him. We're optimistic that it'll move in the Senate. A number of senators have expressed support. So if you're interested in pushing this legislation and getting this legislation moving, the number one person you should talk to is your state senator. And your state senator for the area is?
Mike Knopf.
Mike Knopf. Senator Knopf has expressed some concerns with this legislation. I think that's because he hasn't had the time to really read it and understand what it's about. One of the concerns he expressed was the background checks, but as I covered already, none of that changes. So I just think he needs to understand what's in here. I'm very sympathetic to legislators. I understand they work on a lot of legislation and they cannot know every detail of every piece of legislation. So it's up to us to help them out. Even though it's already out of the House, you can still contact your representative. They can still push. They can still talk to the respective senator in the Senate, as well as they can talk to the third step of the governor. As you may know, Governor Snyder is not necessarily a friend to us. We could have worse, let's be honest, but he's not necessarily our friend either. I will be completely honest with you and say I think the chances of him signing this legislation are a long shot. But we have to try. I'd rather have him stand in our way than we stand in our own way. There's also this small possibility, but it is possible that the lieutenant governor could sign the legislation. If the governor leaves the state, say goes on a business trip to China or overseas somewhere like what he did recently, and legislation suddenly moves and it goes to the lieutenant governor can sign legislation in the governor's absence. I'm not familiar with this happening in Michigan over the protest of the governor, but I do know it has happened in other states where they wait for the governor to leave and suddenly pass some legislation and get a friendly lieutenant governor to sign it. I'm not going to tell you this is likely, but it is a possibility. With the lieutenant governor running for governor and wanting to separate himself perhaps from some of the governor or from the governor on some items, who knows? I don't. It's just a possibility. So that's where the legislation is. Again, it is the Government Operations Committee in the Senate currently.
So with that being said, you said his name was Meekoff, that's the,
Arlen Meekoff is the
Okay.
Senate Majority Leader. He is also the committee chair for the committee this legislation is in.
was he a representative before?
I think he was, I can't
Okay.
remember.
So I guess what my question was, if so, was he friendly at that point?
Arlen
As a rep?
Meekoff is generally friendly to firearms. He carries himself. He's generally pro-gun. I say generally because obviously in what we may call pro-gun, there's a spectrum. And let's just use open carry, for example. Some people might say, you know what, I've had my CPL for 20 years, I'm extremely pro-gun, but I don't like open carry. Okay, that's fine. I would put him into that category. He's generally been pretty pro-gun. He's worked very hard on some pro-gun legislation. He's not quite as universal in his pro-gun stance as I personally would like. But again, we could have far, far worse. So while he's very supportive of concealed carry, he's very supportive of the shall issue legislation that passed years ago. Whether or not he's supportive of this legislation, I'm not sure, if that helps. There's a question in the back. Did you have a question?
I just was wondering, you talked about our state senator needs a little urging. Have you offered any kind of insight to the man yourself?
Not personally. I've talked to him a number of times, but it's been on other topics prior to this coming up.
I've known Mike a long time. He seems to be open to people that are educated.
Joel and I have talked to him quite a bit, and The problem is, state police started out as neutral. They ended up going in opposition along with the Sheriff's Association. And Mike being a former trooper, lieutenant in the state police, what they have to say, what they want to see has a strong bearing on him. We're still talking though.
You know, that's really great to bring up. Opposition from members of law enforcement. Does anybody here hate law enforcement? I keep asking questions, nobody raises their hand yet.
It's amazing.
Mike Knopf was pretty supportive of the right to carry.
And I believe he very much is. A lot of times in legislation like this, just like with Arlen Meekoff, it comes down to the specifics.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what's going on here.
Yeah, Mike was still a trooper when, in 2001, when our original shall issue package of bills passed, and he came on board along with the then Sheriff Al Byam and our prosecuting attorney at that time. We were working on that group to try and get Calhoun County's policy, gun board policy changed, and then finally the legislation passed and that changed their policy for them.
So again, nobody's raising their, nobody's anti-cop. Wow, gee.
Did you want us to be?
No, I did not.
Devil's advocate,
Um,
we can go there.
And let me just address it really quick. As a president of Michigan Open Carry, I know there's a public perception out there of open carry headbutting with law enforcement. I absolutely know that perception exists. For my time of taking over this organization, I have done a lot of work to try and bridge that gap. To try and say, look, yeah, we might be on different ends of what happens, but that doesn't mean we need to be mean to each other. That doesn't mean we need to disrespect each other. And I think we have come a very, very long way. When's the last time you saw a lawsuit involving open carry against an officer in Michigan? Good. That's how I want it to be. The only people that win in these kind of lawsuits are the lawyers.
There was a guy on the east side that did it with a rifle. And he used to walk around with a rifle.
They walked into a police station.
Yeah.
And they just got found guilty of felonies, because that's another story. We don't get along with those guys, I'll put it that way. Through education, through educating members of law enforcement, through educating members of the community, we've been able to have everybody understand what's going on and understand how to act responsibly and respectfully. And I take it as a personal point of pride that we're no longer seeing really bad instances, or if we do, they are incredibly rare and they're not turning out the way they used to. So again, I want to see that. Joel and I have, we've spent a very considerable amount of time already this year working with the two liaisons to the Michigan State Police. We have a very good communication with them. We're very respectful of them. They're very respectful to us. I think we have a fantastic working relationship with the MSP liaisons. And that relationship has been very productive. One of the things we did in this legislation, it's more of a minor point, and I didn't want to throw too much information at you, so I didn't bring it up, but I guess I'll bring it up now, is one of the compromises we made with the Michigan State Police in this legislation revolves around disclosure. As you know, the CPL holders, if you're carrying a concealed pistol and you're stopped by an officer, you have to immediately tell the officer you're carrying. Well, one of the problems is what is immediate? Well, for you, in this area of the state, immediate is probably going to be when you get around to it for the officer. I hate playing this card, but when the card is true, it's true. If you're a black person in Wayne County, there's no such thing as on time. I'm just going to be honest with you. This law is not applied universally across the state. And if you go to court, especially in Wayne County, on a charge of failing to disclose immediately, you will lose. And then there goes your $500, and there goes your license for 6 months. Over here, law enforcement tend to have a little bit more common sense. It's just flatly how it works. Another thing is the law of disclosure only applies to Michigan CPL holders. Very clear, Michigan CPL holders. In Indiana, just south of the border here, an 18-year-old can get a lifetime license without any training at all. And that 18-year-old does not have to disclose in Indiana, nor do they have to disclose in Michigan. But I don't see a trail of dead bodies or dead police officers coming up I-69. Because, well, really disclosure is based on logical fallacy here. Let me explain disclosure. So what we did as the compromise is we make disclosure apply to everyone carrying a concealed firearm. No longer a concealed pistol, concealed firearm, and it's everyone. In exchange, it's no longer immediate, it's upon request. So sir, do you have a firearm tonight? Yes, officer, I do. So it's up to them to ask, and if it's a matter of officer safety, which officer is not going to ask? And again, it applies to everyone, whether you're from this state, from another. And in exchange for that, instead of it being a $500 fine and a 6-month suspension on your license, if you don't, it comes down to a $100 fine and no license suspension. So it becomes upon request and a $100 fine, and that's it. And it's applied universally based on request instead of immediate. We think that's a big win just in and of itself. And again, as that compromise, we make it apply to everyone, whether you're carrying constitutionally, whether you're carrying under a Michigan CPL, whether it's under an Indiana CPL or anything else, it would apply to everyone. In the end, it makes a lot more common sense.
Well, in Michigan, if they run your license plates, they know what you're about.
Not quite anymore. That law changed in December of 2014. We passed some legislation that made it explicit. It used to be based on the Michigan Supreme Court precedent, but we made it explicit in the law that your CPL information, your firearm information, is not subject to FOIA. And in that legislation, it was tweaked a little bit so that when an officer runs your plates on the vehicle, it used to pop up your CPL status used to pop up automatically in lean. It no longer pops up automatically. What the officer does is they have a checkbox if they want to inquire into the CPL database. They have to state a reason why they are inquiring in the database. And one of those reasons that they can check, they have to basically check one of the checkboxes, is officer safety. And so it depends on the officer. Some officers will check that checkbox every single time they run lean. Some will only do it if they feel there's a reason.
I wasn't aware of that.
No,
It's a recent change that wasn't publicized much. There was a problem with some officers kind of fishing for information and mistreating some license holders.
and for what it's worth, some officers didn't catch the memo either. And when it went into effect, there were a few people that were arrested because it didn't pop up automatically. Well, did you check? Well, no, it didn't pop up automatically. You're going to jail. They had to explain what happened. But everything's fine now. Everybody understands now. So we talked about disclosure. We talked about the compromise we made with the Michigan State Police. What the Michigan State Police still want is they want training. And again, we all like training, right? But here's the thing. If you can carry without a license, there's nothing for us to attach training to, because training is attached to the CPL. And if you don't need a CPL or any other license to carry, then even if we wanted to require training somehow, there's nothing to attach it to. So there's, unfortunately, in this, they're here and we're here, and there's just no middle ground for us to meet in. And I think we both recognize that, and we both say, I respect your position. We just can't find that middle ground. And the second thing that we disagree on is they want to, they want to require everyone that's in possession of a firearm to have ID on them. Like me right now, I do not have to have ID on me. If I'm carrying a concealed pistol, then I have to have my CPL and my driver's license on me. But since I'm not carrying concealed, I don't have to have anything on me. And it's because you're right. Well, they want anyone carrying a firearm to have ID on them and present that ID when they're stopped by an officer. That violates the Fourth Amendment to me. I understand why they want it. I truly do. There are some people that have guns and didn't get them the right way that probably shouldn't have them in some bad parts of the state, and I completely understand why a member of the Michigan State Police or any other member of law enforcement would want this as a valuable tool. The problem for them is the same problem for us. It's the Fourth Amendment. We just can't do that. And so I respect their position, but I'm firm in that we can't find a middle ground there because I just don't think it exists. I hope that answers the questions for the Michigan State Police. Again, I don't want to throw them under the bus. I very much respect them. We've been working very well with them. We're still working to try and get them to neutral. They think that they can get there. We're optimistic that they can get there. We're still working on it. When it comes to the Michigan Sheriff's Association, that's a different ball of wax. Frankly, the representatives of the Michigan Sheriff's Association that represented the organization to the community, I think did a very poor job of respecting the Fourth Amendment and understanding what the legislation did and how the current law works. Yes, members of law enforcement are not legal experts and they don't necessarily know firearm law like an encyclopedia. And that's okay. Think of it this way. There are people that are lawyers that all they do is practice a specific section of the law. And even they're learning, and it's a full-time job for them just to keep up on the changes for that one small section. But if you're a member of law enforcement, you do it all. And there's no possible way that you can keep up on everything, even if you wanted to. Even if we stop changing everything, you still wouldn't be able to get it all right. So I'm very sympathetic to members of law enforcement that don't know every single little detail, because they're humans and it makes sense. But when it comes to testifying on legislation, well, you should do some research before you testify on that legislation. You should do some research before you take a position on legislation. And we found the liaison from the Fraternal Order of Police flatly admitted he didn't think he did, but after I showed him the law, he understood that he flatly admitted to doing things that absolutely broke the law when he opposed this legislation. So for the Michigan State Police, I think we're working very well with them. Some of the other law enforcement communities don't understand, and I don't think they want to understand. When it comes to specific members of law enforcement, that's a completely different ball of wax. Talk to your sheriff, talk to your local police chiefs, talk to the members on the street, the rank and file. Talk to them and get them to understand where they're coming from and get them to understand where you're coming from. I apologize for that long-winded answer to that question, but it was a very good question, and I hope I gave you a lot of information.
I have a question on about the Michigan Sheriff's Association. I believe it was the committee chair that asked their lawyer representative from their board whether or not he polled all the members of the association, and he reluctantly admitted that no, he hadn't polled the entire membership, and I believe he asked them to do that. Do you know, have they done that?
I do not know that they have done that. They may have, but if they did, I don't know about it. What Wayne's getting at is the Michigan Sheriff's Association took a position on this legislation. And the way they took that position is they have, I want to say, a 6 or 7 member board. That board voted for the position of the entire organization. It wasn't a vote of all 83 sheriffs in the state. So that's why you see sheriffs like Darleith has been very, very in favor of this legislation. But then you get some other sheriffs that are from different areas of the state that are more opposed to it. The board that represents the Michigan Sheriff's Association tends to come from less gun-friendly areas. We use that political term.
Yes, you say yes, you have open carry. The officer does not have, you don't have to use an officer in any type of identification. Isn't that going to piss them off?
I would hope not.
But the chances are pretty good that you're not complying with what he's asking.
Well, it's a very good question. So, if I'm carrying openly, kind of like I'm carrying right now, I have no duty to provide my ID to the officer. And as a general rule, Michigan Open Carry tells people never consent to a search. You do what you want to do. You're a free person, but our general recommendation is never consent to a search. But isn't that going to upset the officer? Well, we have two options. We have yes and no. If it does, well, if it doesn't upset the officer, you're good to go, right? It didn't upset the officer, there's no backlash on that. The officer respects your rights, he understands what's going on, understand you have every right to not consent to a search. If not consenting to a search voluntarily does upset the officer, I think you made the right decision, because that would mean that is the very officer you would not want to consent to a search to. Does that make sense? If it's going to upset the officer, then that is the officer that I want to exercise my rights to. And unfortunately, the way it works is we don't know when we should exercise our rights until it's too late. If I knew an officer had good intentions, then yeah, you know what, here's my identification, here's all this stuff, here's everything, yeah, look through my car. But I don't know what his intentions really are until it's done, and it's too late for me to suddenly start exercising my rights. And so that's why, as a general recommendation, we say you have to exercise your rights from the very get-go and stand firm on that, not because you're disrespecting the officer, not at all. Just because if it's the person you actually need to have your rights because of, you have to start off from the very beginning, and you don't know you made the wrong decision until it's too late.
Yeah, now, obviously, you can't be in your car. And he could request your ID if you're in your car.
If I'm carrying a concealed pistol and I'm lawfully stopped, then the officer absolutely can request my ID, absolutely.
Yeah, because as an operator of a vehicle, he can request that.
If I'm carrying a concealed pistol and I'm lawfully stopped, then the officer absolutely can request my ID. Now, I think where we're not quite coming together here is people sometimes say, and this is very, very, very specific minutia, if you will. So some people say, well, if you're in a car, it's considered concealed, but that's not true. The law for 90 years, in fact, the law for more than 90 years has said in a vehicle, concealed or otherwise. And then the CPL statute, it says the CPL allows you to carry a pistol concealed on your person or concealed in a vehicle or not concealed in a vehicle. So the law specifically points out that there is a manner of carry in a vehicle that is not concealed. And the disclosure statute says it only applies to concealed pistols. Now, what does that mean in a vehicle? I don't know. I say you err on the side of caution and you just disclose. But if you really want to get into the legal theory about it, it's something my group talks about. This is how we find out about things. This is how we move the ball forward, is reading the law, reading what's actually there, reading where, you know what, people have been misinterpreting this for a long time and we need to actually change it around. This is what we did with open carry. A couple guys sat around the table and said, you know what? We can carry openly without a license. And then in the beginning, a lot of people said, no, you can't, until they eventually proved themselves right. I don't know how familiar you are with it. It talks about it in that pamphlet. If you take a look at your CPL, there's a list of places on the back of your CPL that says you cannot carry a concealed pistol in there. Now, understand what I said. You cannot carry a concealed pistol in this list of places. I'm not carrying a concealed pistol. I've carried in just about every single one of these places lawfully. Schools, I've been in dozens of schools all across the state. If you want to know, my organization is pushing a lawsuit against trial area schools about preemption, about whether or not schools can make their own rules. We say no, schools can't make their own rules. They have to allow you law-abiding citizens who are licensed with the CPL to carry on their premises. The whole point there is not to push open carry in the schools, but if we're going to the Michigan Supreme Court, if the Michigan Supreme Court rules with Michigan open carry, I think you will immediately see legislation to allow concealed carry in these places.
Yeah.
Right. But we do it through open carry. And it doesn't make sense right away to people until we start explaining it about how, again, it's one tool in a toolbox. And let's use all the tools. You have gun clubs like this, that's one tool. Fantastic tools. You have organizations like USCCA pushing concealed carry. Fantastic. You have groups pushing hunting. Fantastic. Groups pushing youth shooting. Fantastic. We have the tool of open carry too. I know how to use it, and I'm very willing to use it for the betterment, the benefit of the entire gun community.
Where I was headed though was that the only situation where you would refuse an open carry, is if you're walking around.
Right, yep. If I'm openly carrying, I have no duty to provide anything to the officer.
But just walking has nothing to do with vehicles,
Right, yep.
because you can't take it in the vehicle.
Well, I need a CPL to take it in a vehicle,
Yeah,
but
but I mean,
yep,
otherwise.
if I'm walking down the street, there's no question that that is not concealed. If it's carried like I'm doing right now, it's not concealed. I have no duty to disclose to an officer, and that makes sense, right? Why would I have to disclose to the officer when the officer can just see what's going on? What do I need to really disclose? And since I don't have to have any ID or information on me, I technically don't have to provide it. Whether or not you provide it to the officer, that is entirely your decision. You heard our general recommendation. You're free citizens that can make your own choice. How are we doing on time? I don't know what our limitations are.
Any time you want to wrap it up, that's fine, but as long as questions come. I've got a couple of statements I want to make before everybody goes away too, so.
Keep related to this?
Carry on. Oh, yeah,
If
yeah.
there's any more questions, I'm more than happy to answer questions on this legislation, on other legislation. Pistol registration is something we're working on. Currently, you have to register your pistols with the state.
What's more dangerous than a gun-free zone?
We'll talk about that pretty quick.
Technically, you have to register pistols with the state. I don't like registering. I no longer register my pistols with the state for what it's worth. The last paperwork that I got my pistol from Joel's shop, went right outside and told people to turn their cell phones on, and I burned the paperwork in front of the camera without turning it in. And I did so legally. Legally, let me be very clear about that. Legally, I did not register my pistol. If you want to know more about that, I'll tell you more afterwards, because it's very interesting how it works.
I thought that was part of this new legislation.
It's not. Nope. Remember, the purchasing process would stay in place, so would the registration process. There is separate legislation to deal with registration. That bill is House Bill 4554, introduced by Representative Lee Chatfield. Currently, it makes registration May registration, so it leaves a process in place. It just removes the mandate on it. The Michigan State Police don't like that, and neither do we, because we think it makes the process more onerous on the state police than it would just eliminating it completely.
So what did you do by burning your registration?
Okay,
Where'd you make all
since
the-
we have the question, let's wade into it a little bit. 90 years ago, when we passed Public Act 372 of 1927, that's when we created, well, we technically had the county gun boards before that, but that's the law all of our current gun laws stem from. Public Act 372 of 1927. Obviously, it turns 90 years old this year. In a little-known Section 12 of that act, they said that anyone holding a license to carry a concealed pistol issued by another state was exempt from the act. And while there were a few other states that issued to non-residents, they did exist. And interestingly enough, at that time, if you had a license, if you were holding a license to carry a concealed pistol issued by another state, you were exempt from the entire act. You could have machine guns, you could have explosives, brass knuckles, everything. Well, over the years, they've limited the scope of it, but they haven't changed the language. Until our shall issue law passed, they tweaked the word person to United States citizen, but they left the rest in place. And at the same time, in another section, it's actually the very next section, they changed the law exempting people from other states from the CPL to carry a concealed pistol. They added a residency requirement there. They said a person of another state licensed by that state doesn't have to have a Michigan CPL. So if you're an Ohio resident, you have Ohio CPL, you can carry concealed in Michigan. This is where the notion comes from of Michigan only recognizes resident licenses. That is absolutely true when it comes to carrying a concealed pistol. But that's a different section than the one I'm talking about right now. That's in section 12A. I'm talking about 12. 12 exempts from the purchasing process and the registration process. It no longer exempts from the entire thing. Again, they narrowed it down, but it still exempts from the purchasing and registration process. And it says today, in the very same legislation that added the residency requirement somewhere else, they did not add the residency requirement in this section, so you cannot say the legislature intended to add a residency requirement, because they didn't. it still says, a United States citizen holding a license to carry a concealed pistol issued by another state. If you're a Michigan CPL holder, through the mail, you can get an Arizona CWP. $60, fingerprint cards, right through the mail, done. Here's my Arizona CWP. So I am holding a license to carry a concealed pistol issued by another state. It doesn't sound right. I'll tell you that right off the bat. But it says it in the law, and it's said it for 90 years, and the law is the law. If we don't like it, we have to follow it, and if the police don't like it, they still have to follow it too. And until it changes, that's what it says. So as far as I'm concerned, I have exempted myself from registration, and I am very confident about it, that there is a video of me on YouTube burning my registration paperwork, because that's how confident in this I am. Now,
I want to
do
give,
you need to do that? That's entirely up to you. I'm more than happy to push the envelope a little, but that's just me. Again, we're all free citizens.
So where does it show your home address on that Arizona card, or does it show you the resident of Arizona?
No, I'm not, it's a non-resident license. Yep. For what it's worth, I have talked to my local police station about it. I live in Kentwood, just south of Grand Rapids. I'm very good friends with the police station there. I've sent them the video. I've talked to the police about it before. They said, well, we're going to send this off to the prosecutor's office and do whatever they direct us to do. I said, excellent, thank you very much for the help. And we haven't heard back from the prosecutor, who I actually talked to the prosecutor previously about this subject and basically said, well, we can't give answers on hypothetical situations, which I completely understand.
It's not hypothetical.
But it's not hypothetical anymore, and I haven't heard anything from them. Because
And it's
I think there's a reason for it.
So when you purchase a pistol, that normally would be registered.
Normally, I would have to turn in that paperwork.
Yeah, but you do it with that permit.
No, nothing really changes in the permit, in the purchasing process, except when they hand over that RI-60, it's a sales record, I just say nothing. Well, actually, I don't do that. I take it and make another video of me burning it. Because, you might not want attention, but in the group that I'm a part of, we're trying to get attention to this topic. So while I'm not trying to put my finger in anyone's face, I have to get attention for this, for more people to understand the way it works so they can make their own decisions.
So,
So
I
you
have,
self-register in this.
Sorry, what?
You turn in your own registrations in this thing.
I don't register at all.
No, I mean, a normal person would turn in their own.
Yes, yep. If you buy from an FFL, from a gun dealer, or if you have a CPL and you do go through a private sale, you fill out the pistol sales record, form number RI-60, and it's your duty to turn that in to your local police department within 10 days. I don't turn those in anymore. That's the way it works.
if I'm stopped and I'm confused on this, if the officer asks me if I have a CPL.
Yep, now, that would be under this constitutional carry legislation, which is not passed yet.
Okay. I could be fined $100 if he has to ask me.
And you
Is that what you're
refuse.
saying? Oh, and I refuse.
And let's say you pull me over, sir, do you have a firearm tonight? No, officer, I don't. And then later on, you get me out of the vehicle and find I have a firearm that I didn't tell you about, that would be $100 fine.
Oh, okay. I just didn't want him to have to ask me first, and then, because I didn't tell him soon enough.
Well, you can still tell, let's say this legislation does pass, all right? And it changes it from you have a duty to immediately disclose to the officer has the duty to ask you, and then you have the duty to answer honestly. Let's say that actually does go into effect and that actually does change. Well, nothing's stopping you from notifying the officer before they can ask. You could absolutely do that if you want to make sure the officers relax or be nice to the officer, or heck, you're trying to get out of a ticket and you think it's going to help you. There's nothing stopping you from telling the officer right away. But the duty shifts. It shifts from you to the officer, and that's a means of protecting you.
Yeah, because currently you still have to disclose
Yeah,
immediately.
nothing has changed currently. Nothing has changed currently.
But you want to do it properly, you don't want to say, hey, I have a gun.
Exactly. The best way to notify an officer to make sure they really know is to grab it and hold it out the window while screaming, I have a gun, right?
keep your hands where they can see.
Yep. Keep your, Freedom Firearms, Joel's shop has a great video to go watch.
Yeah.
I just keep
Yeah.
it with my license and I give him both of them.
Right, that's the good,
Understand that according to the courts, simply just handing your CPL over is not disclosure. You have to actually tell the officer, I have a firearm on me or in the vehicle. The courts have ruled that just handing your license over, why else would you be handing it over? But they have said, well, technically, just because you're handing your license over, that doesn't mean you have a gun on you.
That's how lawyers make money.
That's how they make money,
That's
exactly right.
I see.
that's true.
I was gonna ask, do passengers in a vehicle fall under the same requirement?
Do passengers in a vehicle fall under the same requirement? Excellent question. Yes, they do. There's a United States Supreme Court case that comes out of California, Brendelin v. California, something like that, where the Supreme Court held for the purposes of the Fourth Amendment, passengers are considered stopped too. And as our law says, anyone that's stopped and has a concealed pistol has to disclose. So if you are a passenger of a vehicle and you're carrying a concealed pistol, you have to disclose. Let me tweak that a little bit. If you're a passenger of a vehicle and you're carrying a concealed pistol and you have a CPL, you have a duty to disclose. If you're carrying illegally, you have no duty to disclose because one, you don't have a CPL, meaning therefore the law doesn't apply to you, and two, the Fifth Amendment protects you from incriminating yourself. So that's why I say disclosure is based on a logical fallacy, if you caught that before, because it only applies to good people. It only means the people the officer's not concerned with are the only people that have to tell the officer they're armed. If you intend to do the officer harm, if you're carrying illegally, you have no duty to tell the officer. That's why disclosure is a logical fallacy.
You have to do it counterclockwise?
I say everybody else scream at once. And
Yeah.
pick it up to them.
Let's suppose you don't have a CPL, but you do have a pistol in your trunk unloaded in a case. How about disclosure?
You don't have a CPL, pistol's unloaded in case and in the trunk. In that circumstance, you fall under the transport provisions in, if you're interested to know this, the statute is 750.231A. It's mentioned in the pamphlet. Somewhere. Here it is, on the back. 750.231A, subsection 1, subdivision D and E. If you fall under those provisions, you're transporting the pistol. If you're doing that, it doesn't matter whether or not you have a CPL. In that circumstance, you're not carrying a concealed pistol. It doesn't matter whether you're licensed or not, you're not carrying a concealed pistol, and therefore disclosure does not apply. You don't have to tell an officer. Only when you're carrying that concealed pistol. Transporting in the trunk, unloading in a case, that's not carrying, and you don't have to tell the officer about that. That make sense?
You drive a pickup truck.
Driving a pickup truck,
Yeah, it's in the back seat,
great question.
in the case.
In a case. So, the way the transport law works is it has two sections. The first section says, well, regardless of the section, the pistol, long guns are different. The standard for a long gun is actually lower than for a pistol, just to make things nice and easy for everyone to follow, right? It's always easier for people to follow different sets of criteria that work in different lanes. For a pistol, the pistol must be unloaded in a case designed for the storage of firearms. Case isn't designed for the storage of firearms, felony. And then, if you have a trunk, it must be in your trunk. If your vehicle does not have a trunk, and only if your vehicle does not have a trunk, is this other option available to you, and that's in or not readily accessible to the occupants of the vehicle. So if you have a truck, if you have a car with a hatchback, a van, a Suburban, anything that doesn't have a proper trunk, the pistol must be unloaded, encased, and not readily accessible to the occupants of the vehicle. Or, if you have a CPL, you don't have to worry about any of that anyways. Unless you feel like not disclosing it. Or you're drinking. Then it would apply.
How's that compared with the long gun then?
How does that compare to the long gun? So, we went through the pistol criteria. It was basically, the pistol criteria was all of above. You have to meet every single one of those pieces, otherwise felony. with the long gun statute, and we're actually working with the MSP, and they completely support us on this, to make the pistol transport statute like the long gun. The long gun one is unloaded and one of the following. It needs to be inaccessible to the occupants, taken down, encased, or there's a fourth one I can't quite remember. So disassembled. You have your, let's say you have your shotgun taken down. You have you're going to shoot track. For what it's worth, for some reason you don't have your case with you. You just take it down really quick. You set it on the passenger seat next to you. It's not loaded. Well, then it is unloaded and taken down, because you only need to meet unloaded and one of the following instead of all of the following. There was a guy, an Army veteran, that decorated career, moved his family back to Detroit just recently, had scholarships to go to medical school, very bright future ahead of him, very good past. He did not have enough room in the family SUV to fit his pistol case. So what he did is he took his Glock, he took the slide off, magazine out, no ammunition in the vehicle whatsoever. Under the back seat of the SUV, he slid the slide under one side of the back seat and the frame under the other side of the back seat on opposite ends of the vehicle, and had the magazine somewhere completely else, again with no ammunition in the vehicle whatsoever. What did he do wrong?
Not a case.
Not in a case. Guess what kind of charge he's facing? A felony. Yep. Wayne County. There's no common sense left there.
Nope.
Or we don't live over
Thankfully.
Yeah, I've had a lot of choice remarks about the prosecution there destroying their communities, but I'll leave
Really,
that out.
really, yeah. That's crazy.
You know Darlene?
I do.
She was my first instructor.
First instructor, Dar's a great guy.
Yes, he is.
Always has,
That's-
Yeah.
no matter what the sheriff says.
Are there any other questions? I'm more than happy to answer questions all night long, but I don't want to keep anyone longer than you want to be here.
I just have one little tiny one.
Sure.
If a passenger without a CPL license is in the vehicle, and say you have your weapon out, because some people carry it carry it out in the dash. I don't know if that's a good idea, but a police officer comes up and that person sitting in the passenger seat doesn't have, they've got access to it. Yes. So.
Fantastic question. Great question, really. So the question is, allow me to articulate the situation and tell me if I get it correct. Two people in a vehicle, one's licensed, the other is not. Let's say they're spouse. Let's say my wife is in the car with me. She's in the passenger seat. I take my pistol off my hip and I put it in the cup holder. Is that kind of what we're talking about? Yeah. I'm licensed, she's not in this situation. What's going on there? Because technically it's accessible. This is where we get into something called constructive possession. And if you want to know more about constructive possession, talk to an attorney to really understand this. I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving you legal advice. But the way one attorney described it to me, which I love, when you hear an attorney or a lawyer say constructive, what they're really saying is let's pretend. And constructive possession is who's technically in possession of that pistol. Well, if it's registered to me, or if I'm the one that's licensed to carry it and it's readily within my immediate access, I'm technically in constructive possession of it now. That's how it works.
So if you step out of the car and put a penny in.
If I step out of the car now to pump gas, right? There is an Attorney General opinion from Mike Cox that says, well, it's not maybe automatically a felony. There's at least an argument there, depending on the circumstances. But I just tell everybody, go get your CPL. Go get your CPL. It eliminates, as an open carry president, I'm telling you, get your CPL. It makes open carry easy. It makes concealed carry easy. It makes it so you're not going to become a felon. It really eliminates so many potholes that you might fall in. Just get your CPL. Is there any more questions? You have trifolds. There's a stack. I'm going to leave it up here. My card has my email and phone number on it. Come up and grab one afterwards. Send me any other questions that you might think of afterwards, any other information that you might want afterwards. I'm always happy to help anyone that needs it.
All right. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Now, is there anybody here that's wondering why Wayne brought somebody from open carry here? How many people have ever heard me say, do not open carry in inappropriate places? I figured some of you might be a little bit surprised, but the reason being, well, leadership at Michigan Open Carry has changed, and their attitude has changed, and their tactics have changed, and you probably heard him say, why do we open carry in schools? It's because we want to get it to where we can legally concealed carry at schools. And it's kind of come down to the point where in order to get rid of these enumerated pistol-free zones, that we're going to have to start having some demonstrations like this to change the law. Now, I still recommend that you don't strap on an M1 and go down to the park and you know, quite frankly, carrying like he is now, if you go in where there's a bunch of kids and their mommies are playing out in the swing sets and stuff, it's probably gonna get a visit from law enforcement, and darn near unquestionably it's going to. So it can be considerate if you do open carry. You can come here, open carry. It's absolutely appropriate and not offensive to, well, at least most people that come to our meetings.
Can I jump in on the M1? Pat?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Michigan Open Carry advocates for a lawfully openly carried holstered handgun,
Yeah, that's different.
okay? It's not that we're opposed to long gun open carry, that's just, we don't focus on it. All the laws deal on pistols, and that's where we focus.
That guy in Detroit did it for a long
How
time.
did the guy
Yeah.
down at Homer?
And again, we don't get along.
The guy in Homer, it's strange. His employer didn't allow him to open carry. But when he went to pick up his kid at school, he's tired of these pistol-free zones. He figures his kid's not as safe. I mean, let's face it, this is where these wacko murderers that they call active shooters, which honks me off because I'm an active shooter, but I'm not a murderer. Anyway, that's what they call them. That's where they're attracted. They go to where they are darn near certain that there's not going to be any armed opposition, and they just wreak havoc then. So anyway, that guy and the people at school came to an agreement, and they worked it out as he wasn't being ridiculous, and the school kind of by their own silly rules made the requirement of going into lockdown if they saw any kind of a firearm, which is stupid because they knew he was going to come pick up his kid. But anyway.
If I say, if you come near me, I'm going to punch myself in the face, and you come near me and I punch myself in the face, can I charge you with assault?
That's kind of the same logic,
There's
but
lawyers that would say yes.
yeah, I'm sure. And it'd probably end up at a Supreme Court somewhere.
It's probably bullying.
But anyway, that's the reason. As far as I don't go anywhere without ID and without ID. I understand that constitutionally, under the circumstances he is talking about, you don't have to. And if you were in a situation like that and you thought that an officer maybe was being overzealous and wanted to use you as an example, it might be appropriate to not offer your ID. But far and away, especially around here, our guys in law enforcement are far and away mostly very considerate and very mindful of our rights, and I think it's a perfectly normal logical request to see some ID. That's my opinion, so.
I'll tell you,
But, like he said, we'll leave it up to you.
I like my CPL.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's even almost everybody in his organization that carries openly, they have the CPL because of transport laws, mostly,
And the restricted zones.
and restricted zones, yeah. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? We can carry a gun openly at a school
That is crazy.
with a CPL.
If I can highlight on that really quick, it's bargaining 101, this from my standpoint. Bargaining 101 is you want to make what you have worth more and what they have worth less. And so what they have is this law that they're holding over everybody's head that everybody wants to get rid of. And they're holding it right here going, okay, no, what are you going to give me? What are you going to give me? What are you going to give me? And if all of a sudden you come back to the table and they go, hey, look what I got, and you go, I don't care, it doesn't mean anything to me anymore because I can carry anyways without it. Suddenly they're not, what they have isn't worth nearly as much. And now
Has no power.
their power goes away and your power increases. Bargaining 101.
Kind of Donald Trump style.
Right.
Yeah.
I like it.
So anyway,
If I read that on Twitter, you're in trouble.
I don't have a Twitter account.
Probably just as well, right?
Probably. Yeah. Anyway, well, hey, I sure thank everybody for coming tonight. And if you would, grab your chair and help us put them back on the rack, and we'll call it a night. We'll see you.
If anyone wants my card, I got a pile up here.
AccessVision. Your voice, your community.